Okay, I think we're live. So hi everyone, welcome to another session of M365 May. Another great session, I'm hoping. Week 3 of a bunch of great content. It's been amazing so far. So before we get started, we just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this online conference is hosted, and the traditional custodians of the lands where our Australian-based speakers and participants are located. We also like to pay our respects to elders past, present and future. That also applies to our New Zealand friends, and I'm not going to try and say the Maori version, but we also have a code of conduct which has been for the whole series, the whole sessions, and there's a short version on the screen. There's also a longer version down the bottom if you want to go and have a read of that. It's fairly logical and it makes some common sense. In short, it's be constructive, be respectful, be helpful, and be kind. So this is me. So this session is called The Power to Create. My name is Errol LeBoydre. The name is obviously French, and it sounds like it's hard to say until you actually pronounce it out. But I'm the Principal Director of Wildlinks, and we're an Australian company. We do solutions and services, predominantly in the information management space, but we have a strong focus with governance and performance. I've got obviously the Twitter handles and all those informations and stuff there. I am a husband of my soulmate, my beautiful wife. I'm also a father of a bunch of kids. Oh, they're not kids anymore. They're grown-ups, which is kind of good. And I'm also a granddad to 2 lovely grandsons. And boy, they bring a bunch of joy to my life. It's crazy. I got to see them for the first time last weekend for a long time, and that's while we're in ISO land and in strange territory. One thing that I did miss was seeing my kids and seeing my grandkids. So we've slowly starting to ease it up a little bit, thankfully. But the whole cave thing, well, I was born to be in a cave. That works for me, but I did miss my family a lot. The agenda for the session is fairly simple. Introduction, as we're doing now. I'm going to talk about what is Microsoft Graph. I'm going to talk about why we need it, why we need the graph. I'll get to a point there. We'll have a pause, and we'll allow you to sort of scan a QR code. There's some prizes happening, and one of the sponsors have been generous to put some things on the table for you guys. Then I'm gonna hit the graph demonstration, and I'm going to say little prayers to the demo gods and the connection gods. Hopefully that's okay. Then we'll get into the crux of what this session's about, and that is, how quickly can we put together an app based upon the graph toolkit, and what does that mean? After that, towards the end there, we've got some time for some Q&A, and if there's any questions, we might hit them during the session, or we might hit them afterwards. See how we're placed. So let's kick this off. What is Microsoft Graph? And that cute little icon there is, I don't know if you guys know developers. If you are developers, we tend to do things that other people don't think are funny, but that is a giraffe, the draft graph. That's kind of how that come about. We've got these icons and stickers for everything we do. It keeps us sane. But effectively, the graph is something that came about, I think it was first released 2015 from memory. They came about because of a need to have a unified endpoint where developers could access information and data from the Microsoft ecosystem. Now, that's not to say that this stuff didn't exist before the graph. Service APIs and service architecture has been around for a long time, not just the Microsoft, but in just general development solution land. But at some stage, someone said, guys who are developing solutions on the Microsoft stack, they're currently having to access tons of these different endpoints, different SDKs, a whole range of different things to get what they want. So someone said, let's create this thing called the graph. I don't know who that was, Mr. Graph maybe, I don't know. So that's where that started. Now, the graph as a name, it's kind of confusing, and I quite often talk to people in business and government and enterprises, and they'll say, look, we've got a problem, we need to solve this. How do we do that? And quite often these days, if it's a Microsoft-based enterprise, I will say, well, we could probably do it on the graph. And the blank look is just, it's just so common. So when I look, and then I've got to start explaining what the graph is. You know, it's not actually a graph as such from Excel. The graph is a development platform that gives us incredible capability. I think where the graph came from is when we look at this image, which is this is a Microsoft marketing image. The graph came about with this conception, or this idea that everything is connected and everything has a relationship. Now you can see here that in the middle of this is me. Now that's clearly not me, but generally when we talk to the graph, I've logged into Microsoft and then I want to do a bunch of work around me because I've just authenticated in. That doesn't mean that's the only thing we can do, but typically it's about me. So if we have a look at this slide and we say, well, hang on a second, what's related to me? Well, this PowerPoint presentation you're seeing now is an object and it's PowerPoint. I edited it last, so I can see that I've edited it last. It sits in OneDrive, and OneDrive has got folders and it's got connections. We can assign sharing on those files to groups of people, and I can belong to groups of people. We have OneNote. We have all this stuff in the Microsoft ecosystem. We have calendars and tasks and teams and messaging and all this and groups. So it's all part of the bigger picture, but generally you can find a connection and a line to all of these things. So if we can go to one point and then access all of this data and all this information, that becomes quite powerful. It's not just objects that we're talking about here, and I don't know if you can see it, it's a bit blurry maybe, but there is a black box there called trending around. So the graph has become something more than just accessing objects. The trending around concept is something where I can go to the graph and I can say what is trending around me, and that really is more of a service that sits in the Microsoft system. So it's quite simple to have the ability to say trending around me. Well, quite obviously that means what's happening that's related to me, either by files or by people or by groups. Yes, that's much more than just objects. It's as much around services as well. And when we get to look at some of the objects that we can hit in the graph, it's become super more powerful. I mean, the ability to get security information, which it really does encompass the whole start to finish of the Microsoft system. When it relates to me and I can call that back, that's pretty powerful. So why do we need the graph? In a real world, whenever we go and buy an enterprise application or a small application, it just does everything we want. It's magic. I have this need to solve a problem in my business or my enterprise. I go buy it, I plug it in, and everything's sweet. And we all know that's not real. That's not how it works. And that's because, most enterprises, most businesses, or just about everyone, they've got different ways of doing things, and they evolve with processes, and they change with their business needs. They react to changes in markets or pressures from somewhere. So there's this ever changing need of requirements. It's always been a challenge to find the best product or enterprise product or set of products to be able to plug in to solve as much as you can off the shelf as quick as you can, and obviously as cheap as you can and without the hassle. But that simply doesn't happen. If that was the case, then the need to have developers, solution developers, or customization simply wouldn't exist. So why do we need the graph? Well, there are always going to be gaps in requirements. There are always going to be gaps in what we need and what we do. And more and more, I think we're starting to ask questions of how we do things. Is this efficient? Is this the smartest way? Is there a better way? And when you ask those questions, then you say to someone, hey, is there a better way? Can you please tell me the answer? Now, let's put the other hat on. So there's my business hat on, and then there's my developer hat on, or my solution hat on. Yes, there is a better way. Hey, Mr. Business, can you tell me exactly what the problems are? And I'll find you a solution. So this is this interaction or balance between having to find solutions to suit the problems and requirements of businesses. The graph has taken care of a huge bunch of this requirement. It just is, it's a fantastic platform to be able to solve problems. So how has this come about? Has it been a natural evolution from Microsoft? And I say Microsoft, but really it does mean most brands and most technology. I think that the technology and the opportunities and capabilities that we have to play with now it's almost hard to believe compared to where we were, say, 5 years ago. But we picked Microsoft because it's 365 May. And I am a Microsoft-centric solution developer, firstly, so I'm a bit biased. When we look at the evolution and the history of Microsoft, and then look at what Satya Nadella has done for the company, it's freaking awesome. In the book, in Hit Refresh, there's just so many quotes and there's so much goodness in that relates to just about all of us in business. And my favorite quote from that book is that industry does not respect tradition. What it respects is innovation. It's interesting that this is not a new book anymore, of course, but in the last few months, we have been thrust into the levels of innovation and disruption that we couldn't conceive. There's no one that could have envisaged what's happened in the last few months. And we really are at the precipice of change. So all that change is happening. What do we need? Well, we need to change a lot of things, but the ability to be able to present solutions and changes and to be able to respond quickly to situations has never been greater. That wasn't so much exactly a Microsoft plug, but it just happens to be that way. One of the sayings that I like, I've said a fair bit, is that Microsoft isn't the company that your dad thought it was. And it turns out that I am the dad. So I'm the dad as to how it used to be, but I'm also the fresh, starry-eyed kid with the new world order and how it's changed. From a development perspective, from a solution perspective, it's crazy rich right now. It's like being back in primary school. There's so much fun to be had. And if you don't get that, and that's your space, then you need to perhaps have a think about what's going on around you. As I said before, we'd like to thank our sponsors and all these guys who have helped out with this whole event. It started off as a single Saturday event and grew into a month of sessions. And the organisers and the people who are running this behind the scenes, so much kudos to them. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to have a crack and to say my piece. But these sponsors, they work hard and they put their hands in their pockets and they provide prizes, etc. So take the chance if you can to go and visit these guys and check them out and see what they're on about. So this is a time when we have a quick little pause. Not enough time to go get a coffee, but get your cameras out, get your QR readers out, and snap this. There will be a prize drawn at some stage, and this is week 3. So yeah, just take a second to do that, and who knows, you might be surprised. Prized. You see what I did there? And just to talk through something else that I find just fascinating while you're doing that is the whole concept of having a month of technical sessions remote and managed this way on the platform like Teams. Now, Teams isn't perfect and it's got a few things that we'd like to be sorted out. It doesn't have 250,000 faces on it, and switching tenants is a little fiddly, but it happens. But for those that can remember, just go back a short time and think how we have done this without that platform. I've got a couple of these sessions happening in different organisations, and I just click the tenant link, go in there, and bang. One of these ones is global, and there are channels happening in multi-languages where people are discussing what they're going to do for their sessions. It's crazy. I love it. Okay, hopefully you're all good. I can see you nodding. That's cool. Okay, demo time. So the demo is going to form, there's going to be a couple of pieces to this. And I better go find it. As I said, the graph is an access point to a development platform. This particular page here, developer.microsoft, isn't the graph itself. This is just a page that's put together that allows you to explore the graph. But this is the graph here. This is as simple as it is. Graph.microsoft.com. It's a URL endpoint, and from this endpoint, we can do so much. You'll notice there's a v1.0 here. This designates that it's a production, and we have the capacity then to test and to trial against a beta, which in itself is pretty cool, and we get to play with endpoints that are being developed all the time. At the moment, this particular graph endpoint, this is as simple as it gets. If you go back to that image that I showed you with me in the middle, me that wasn't me, and then that's what I've done here, right? Graph version, production version of me. If I run that query, I get back what is my Microsoft profile. Now, for those of you who can see clearly enough, this is Megan, and I'm obviously not Megan. So this whole session has got a bunch of Furbies in it. I'm not the picture in that image, and I'm not Megan. But this is provided as a bunch of data which sits at this endpoint for you to go look at, and there's no authentication. I haven't logged on yet. So this is a free trial or a free way to go and have a play, which in itself is pretty cool. Now, everything that comes back from the graph is JSON based. Now, if you don't know what JSON is, that's okay. If you don't know what it is now, you probably don't need to know it. But if you do know what it is and you're in the development space, then we know that everything in terms of object modeling and data, everything works better if it's JSON. Well, that's a statement. That's not a political point of view on development. So don't come back at me and argue. So this particular model here is for this dummy data. Now I can authenticate into here and get to access my data. And quite often I get asked the question, does that mean that if I've got a Microsoft email account, I can go and sign into the graph with my account and see my data? And the answer is yes. But don't do that. You shouldn't do that, but you can. Yeah, more often than not, if you're doing a lot of work with the Microsoft Graph, then you want to get yourself a development tenant, and you want to get yourself an account that doesn't really have any impact on production. Developers out there, if you don't know, you should know, Microsoft provide an entirely free developer tenant for you to go and explore on. It's an incredible offering, and it's perpetual. So if you keep developing on it, you've got a tenant with 25 E5 licenses that you can go and create, develop against. Simply no excuse not to go play with it. Okay, so yes, so don't log in here with the production and start playing. You might be fairly safe because we're returning data, and just reading it. So what damage can we really do? Not a lot really, because we are just bringing data out. But when we get down to some of these other extension points, we have the capability to then write data and amend data. Okay, so this endpoint, this graph endpoint, isn't just to read data, it is to actually enter, manipulate, is to do everything with all your data. So let's have a look. It's my profile. I don't think Megan's got a picture. Maybe she does. Yeah, there you go. That's Megan. And then I can go and see Megan's email, Megan being me for now. And then you can see all the data that makes up an email, including attachments, the body, the whole lot. So at this point, if you've got in your mindset, hang on a second, if I can do this, maybe I could do something that's functionally smart to help my business or to help my department or to help me. And that's the whole intent of all this. It's just to give you capability to change. My mail, all the items in my drive. So mail is messaging, items in drives. Well, we have me, I have drives, the root of my drive and children. Now, if we had a bunch of time, then we could then go and then really drill down into what we could do with this. Find me a particular drive which has got a business reason, and then return all of the files in that drive that haven't been updated for 2 years, or a JPEG file, or whatever. Really, anything that you can conceive that is data related, we can do here. Something else we can do as well. Let's see. Okay, items around me. This is what I talked about from that other image, items trending. And this, if you think about what this is returning and how you would achieve this some time ago, it would just be a nightmare to try and put it together. Applications batching, we can actually batch calls. We can call Excel. We can actually open up and work in Excel programmatically through the graph. Extensions, groups, insights. Well, what are insights? Well, insights is just another service. It's not an object itself. It's another service that actually that comes back at me because the Microsoft system have created this. Right, so behind the scenes, there's all these things churning away and running around, whether it's machine learning or AI, doesn't really matter. I'm just a user. All I want to do is I want to get my insights. And, I think you could take it for granted that this is an easy thing to do. I go up and get me, drive, recent. Well, insights beta, teams, so we can access all of the team's information. Notifications are pretty cool. So notifications which allow us to develop against Microsoft Graph and get notified of events, which means we can react to events. And that's a really important concept when we talk about whether it's event-based or whether it's manual. If I have to go and do some stuff as a person, but rather an event can actually trigger something to automate, that changes your architecture and changes your way of thinking significantly. Calendars, mails, people, cache. I find this one particularly interesting. So the graph has an endpoint called security. What would that mean? So anything that we get in our O365 tenant and our Azure tenant that's security based, we can access from a development point of view. Now, this doesn't mean that we just go and create new applications that already exist. That's not smart at all. I mean, but if it already exists, we don't need to create it. But quite often we need to fill a gap. And like I said earlier, let's go to security and let's get our security score. So what does that mean, security score? Let's scroll down. Right, so what the Microsoft 365 ecosystem has made recommendations of our Active Directory in Azure, of our virtual machines, of everything. And it's given us, and it'll give us a score. Now this is dummy data, so it doesn't mean too much, but you could go in there with your own tenant and say, what is my security score? And I'll tell you now, and then what it does, it compares your score and your environment and your industry type to others, and it sets this baseline. So, if you've got endpoints that aren't secure, or if you've got MFAs, or if you've got some weird logons on accounts, all this sort of stuff gets surfaced and we can then use it. Okay. So that's all cool, and there's a bunch of stuff there. We can actually put alerts into the graph, SharePoint lists we can do. There's some other capabilities which I think are way undervalued, and we just don't understand what it means just yet. Well, I mean, from a development perspective, we do, but we have the capacity to actually add fields into the Microsoft system. So quite often when we're doing integrations and we need to join systems, enterprise systems, and we need to have things synchronizing, you've quite often got to have not quite often, but you have to have a way of identifying your source of truth objects. The Microsoft environment allows us to actually create a custom field against an object, against most objects, which we can then populate. So just think about that for a second. As I'm a developer, I have a tenant I can then say, I'd like a new field against my personal profile, please, called blah, blah, blah. And then I can populate that through an enterprise. That's significant again. 20. Okay, so this is the Graph Explorer. Like I said, and we've had this for some time. We can actually change the URL to suit a bunch of needs. Once we start to actually understand what the returning data sets are like. Let's go to Planner. I'll just call out one more. Let's go all my Planner tasks. Right, the whole Planner object and task and stuff is once again, it just sits on the back of everything else you do. But what we can do with the graph and with the graph endpoint is we can actually start to customize what you get back. This is a big bunch of JSON. Now, it's in terms of file size coming back over the wire, it's not really that big, but this is only a small set. But we simply don't need all of this data. If I was developing something and I need to call back on Planner tasks. So I could go run this query. I could select. No, I can't. Oh, fail. All right, I was getting too clever anyway. So this is the planner and this is the endpoint. Now, the next part of the demonstration is we're going to move into the toolkit. What you've noticed is this is cool to do, and I can sign in here now with my account, like I said earlier, and I can get my data. The reality is when we go to develop an application and build something from scratch, it still is hard work authenticating with custom applications. It's been a challenge and is still a challenge. And you know, there are different authentication types, different flow types. There's different needs and requirements, different devices, different platforms, all of that stuff. So even though we can actually very quickly call these endpoints and get data back, and we can do funky stuff, the authentication part of it, the authentication aspect, is still a challenge and still hard work. So enter stage left is this project called Microsoft Graph Toolkit. And I can't think of the guy's name who was the driver of it, but the amount of work that's been done in this in the last year or so is just phenomenal. And I'm going to show you around this before we actually go and build an app. Now, just for those who are really interested, there was a session yesterday by Cameron Dwyer, and he's written a lot of documentation and has worked with the a recent blog post about working start to finish sort of thing on the toolkit. Super smart guy, and he's much better at this than I'll ever be. So if you're really seriously interested, go back in time, grab his link to his YouTube and check that out. I've actually got a link in the notes as well. But he builds another app which is super quick and super efficient. So the toolkit effectively is a way of wrapping the graph. Now, everything that I showed you so far is a graph URL endpoint. There are going to be graph SDKs, so the software development kits, and they exist for different languages, different frameworks, different platforms. There's a whole range of them. So obviously using the SDK means you've got a richer experience, and you've got modeling, and you've got all those things which just help us out. So what the Graph Toolkit does, it actually is a simple wrapper, object-based wrapper on the SDK. So what does that mean? I talked before about the complexity of authenticating to get things done. If I were to build a new web page or build a new application or start a project and I needed to authenticate, if my authentication button or logon was as simple as putting that on a page, then, well, hoorah, that's exactly what we want to get to. We want to be able to authenticate without too much drama. There is a tag that goes before this, which I'll show in my project. I'm going to do a little bit of coding, not too much, which then does the actual authenticating to the Azure backend, etc., etc. But right now, I dropped this component on my page. MGT stands for Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and now I've got this button. Now, what you'll notice with the button is the formatting is very much like a Microsoft button. Well, it is formatted with the Microsoft Office framework, and it's changed names, so I'm not sure exactly what that's called, new framework or something or other. But this then allows me to interact with my authentication connection. So if I sign out of Megan, it's as simple as that. I've got a button now, and I can sign back in. It's happening. So while this lag's happening, this playground for Graph Toolkit, and this URL will be in the link at the end of the slides as well. Okay, so Megan's slide let's log back in. At the moment, you can't actually log in with your own account and start playing, and you probably don't need to anyway. So at the moment, I've got this one button that allows me to log in and log out. Now, if you haven't done any developing, you might just go, well, that's just how life should be. I can tell you right now, well, when you're putting together applications, mobile, web, distributed, it doesn't matter. Authenticating against that is hard work. So now that I've done that, what other components do I have in the toolkit? The first release of the toolkit came out with a bunch of stuff, for example, agenda. And I'll just have a quick look through these because it's worth seeing the result of a simple tag drop that you'd use. Right? So all of this comes from that. So you say, hang on a second, where's all the formatting? Where's all the style shedding? Where's all the HTML and tagging? It's actually built into the tag. But you can actually then go and extend this tag in certain ways, right? So this is a meeting agenda component, and I've selected simple. But what if I want to do a get by date, right? So now I've extended that meeting agenda, and I've included a group by day, and then I've entered a date equals, and then count the days 3, right? So my result now on this page is as simple as changing that. If I make that 1, then I get 1. What about event for the next week? Group by days. And what about event by query? Okay, so now this becomes a little more interesting because it's still the same tag, MGT agenda, but we've got the ability to put something behind this event query. Okay. And now the event query is me, events, ordered by start date, which is kind of interesting. If you think back to here, no data. Well, maybe it wasn't that interesting. Done something wrong there. Probably a different, this is dummy account. This isn't the same account back there. So there's probably no events. So yeah, so using this one component, simple, and then we can extend it out. Log on, I had a quick look at MGT people. Okay, just open this up, calling it back. So now you see the richness now of these icons and the ability to hover over them. You know, if you're a developer, tell me how hard that's going to be without something like this toolkit. Show max people 5, and I want to change that because of my real estate in my application. And if there was 18, they'd come up there. Right, show people, and then only find the people by their ID. Find the people in a group, right? Mention people, group ID, bring back the group ID. People picker. Now, this is the same, exactly the same technology as when you open up your Outlook. I've got to find someone that, oops, FE. F fashion, there you go. So this ability to drop down and populate from context from the graph simply by dragging this on your page is great, is cool. And it's no different when I go and actually go into Outlook and go to type in who it's going to. Just go and have a look at how it brings it up. It's exactly the same. It's the same technology. Group ID. Once again, I can bring up people by the group, and that's not going to show too much. Person. Okay, so there's a component called MGT person and query me and assist a photo. Card pick. So there's all these things we can do, and that's great because it allows us to quickly build up an application without the hard work. So for those of you who are astute, would be saying, well, that's great, Errol, but there's only a handful of components there, and my needs would be far greater than that. I've got a much more complex problem to solve. So how am I going to get around doing that? So one of the recent changes to this component list is this thing called management get. What management get is, it's not a component that aligns or joins up with any particular object. It allows you to put in a resource address directly from the graph, regardless. And then you can actually build out your own template based upon the modeling. So all of a sudden, we're not restricted to just object types that sit under that graph type, which are common ones. We also have the ability to put in any address we want based upon what we're having a look at here. Now, I could take that and put it into my address, but the last 3 times I've done that, it hasn't worked. So I'm not going to go for 4. And also, this particular template, it's been built out with those particular fields that we need. This is messages, so it's an email. And you'll also notice that in this particular block of returning, and we're iterating through a bunch of stuff. We're also calling another component within this to give us that nice rich user hover over group as well. Right, so scopes, max pages. Now, when we get to the application, and I'll show you, check the time. What's important is that the application, we still authenticate with some code and some URL callbacks. This is not just a free for all, create a quick app and get some stuff. But what is important is that from these particular gets, we can push through the scope requirements to enable permissions for only what we need to read for this particular application. So that's pretty cool. All right, so look, that's about, and so Microsoft Get, very powerful. And if we come down and have a look at some other Get options, let's look at this particular agenda event template. Okay, so we're using an agenda with templating. That's not exactly, but by templating, which is another feature, allows us to very easily customize the data we get back. Here's a different way of looking at a day schedule. Grouped emails. What does that mean? Slow to come back. Okay, so just another view of emails grouped by the user, right? And with a nice hover over. So it looks great. It's visually appealing, and here it is, 15 lines of code. We can also customize the style sheeting behind this, but out of the box comes a very Microsoft Office UE type styling. And then we've got some other customizations there as well. Teams messages, can we do that? I think we can. There's a team, there's my channels. Once again, 16 lines of code. Okay, so this template now, I'm going to try and let's get into code land. This is where I thought Cameron was particularly brave. He spent a lot of time in the application, and he's got much more confidence than I have. So this is a simple HTML app, and it does absolutely nothing right now. It's as blank and simple as it gets. Right, to prove it to you, that's it. So the first thing we need to do is, how do we get this library, this toolkit library, into my application? You could actually install it, npm it into the actual project itself, or the simpler way is to actually, in the header, we just write a script tag and we call the library, the JavaScript library, from this address. So when we now boot the application up, it brings in this SDK wrapper and allows us to have the functionality. Okay, so 2 more lines of code and we can do our first test. First line of code here is management MSAL provider. MSAL is just an authentication type, and there are many different providers you can use, but I've got this client ID. Client equals that. So what's that all about? I hear someone asking, how we get the authentication against the Azure identity and the user access scenario is we actually have what's called an app registration scenario. So for that ID, application ID, is this particular ID here, and then I'm saying my exposed IP, oops, wrong one, permissions. Okay, so this is where I'm actually saying what you can and can't do, and expose an API, and there. Right, so if I were to go and say for this particular application, I need you to be able to go and see all users' graph data. All of a sudden now I've got to be a global admin in the backend system and grant permissions. So there's a lot more to it than just that. So this ID happens here. The URL this runs up against, it gets authenticated, and there's some tokening that gets pushed back and forwards. So let's boot this up quickly. And if all things are great, now I've got a sign in and it's signed in. So obviously I've actually the last browser or last time I did this, it's cached into my sign in. So straight away I've got a page, I can sign in and I can sign out. At the moment this is single sign on, like I said, and sign in. Now by doing that, by achieving that, I'll tell you I have spent, feels like most of my life trying to achieve that in development space. So that is very cool. I love that. Let's now punch something up, just conscious of the time. I've grabbed some code from that toolkit, from that playground, sorry, and I'm now going to drop in this another chunk. It's another what? It's another 15 lines of code, and let's run this up. So it's loading, bang. Now all of a sudden, I hope there's nothing bad there. This is my real email, so don't look too closely. Go where I want live, yay! So this is now my emails. Now if I log out of this page, I haven't done too much wiring up of any of these components. Signed out, quick. Signed out. I'm too impatient. I'll kill it, start again. I won't actually start it again, but I'll do what I was going to do. So management get resource version scope mail read. So what else can I do with this? Maybe I can drop in a polling component, polling rate, something or other. Bang, bang, bang. I think that's 3 seconds. Let's going to go back. Sign in. It's weird. 1 minute it knows who I am, the next minute it doesn't. There it is. I'm going to send myself a quick hands off the page. I'm not doing anything right now. Test. Okay, so from my mobile, I've just sent myself an email. And nothing. Well, there we go, under the test. So hands off the page, typically with web pages or applications, you've got to refresh them. just the simple polling equals means that if we had an application or a mobile app or anything that requires refreshing, bang, there it goes. Come back and sign out. So we're effectively building an application. Minimal lines of code using the graph toolkit based upon the graph itself, and we're having some fun. So all of a sudden you start to think, well, why? Just switching my screen again. Demo gone. So what does all this mean? So, I've been providing solutions and developing for near on 30 years, probably a bit more than 30 years. My first solution development certification was in just before Y2K, and I'll tell you now some stories about how hard that was. Now, that's just to say it always failed, and we all developed great applications and great solutions back in the day. But it's become exponentially easier as time goes on to produce stuff, to build stuff, and to work stuff. Where it was like 5 years, 2 years, now it's monthly. And as a developer, every week there's something new that happens. But this magic and this richness of development land doesn't actually solve a lot of the actual business problems. We've still got to get into the habit or into a focus of how can we make things better? How can we improve this process? How can we become more efficient? And that's going to come down to the people in business, the people who actually drive things. Without those needs, without those requirements, building application solutions doesn't mean too much at all. Okay, my last slide. Won't bug you anymore. And the slides will go up somewhere where you can get them. The Graph Explorer link, like I said, you just jump on right now and have a play. Even if you're not a developer, just feel what it's like to return data out of Microsoft. Graph documentation, very rich. The toolkit address is there. And like I said before, big fan of this guy, been a follower, bit of a fan. Cameron Dwyer, if you like this, the toolkit stuff, go check out his YouTube, have a look. There is like I said, there's a blog post that's been put up recently, and it's like start to finish, and it starts you off with the simple things and get you through. When it comes to the last day of complicated the MGT gets, that's all Cameron stuff, so very cool. And look, I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions and take a breath.
Hey, Errol, I published the link to Cameron's session in the chat for people in case they were interested in watching it straight after yours.
Cool.
Nice of you to give him a shout out. We do have one question. If anybody else has got any more questions, please drop them in. Now's the time. So Anonymous asks, what use cases have you been able to address or theorize with Graph to solve real business problems?
Sure. So the simple scenario where a front-to-end application or solution is quite complex, but really the user need is quite simple. So, for example, I need to enter a timesheet, and I need to put this spreadsheet somewhere simply, quickly. I don't want to have to log in, go to a portal, go to a spot, etc., etc., etc. So that's quite often the scenario where the user has got a simple thing to achieve, but they have to go through a real big bunch of stuff to get there, and it's painful. It puts people off. So we do a lot of that sort of scenario. We also had a lot of scenarios where we actually read and react to Excel spreadsheets, and we haven't touched base on this yet, but it's a big discussion point. But we can actually have a look at a spreadsheet that changes on OneDrive, and as it changes, and as you change and amend it on OneDrive, we actually can react on a notification system to then do some stuff. And this then sort of falls in line with a range of other things. Now, how we're using Teams right now in terms of customization, according to the graph in Teams, is fairly important when you want to simplify a user process. And I guess that's probably the statement. Anytime you've got a process that's inefficient or too long or drives a user nuts, should be reduced and should be made simple. And the Azure ecosystem itself is full of services which you should have a look at. I've got a talk tomorrow on streaming analytics, and it is an Azure service which takes and ingests bulk data, but then allows us then to filter different events and different things, and allows us then to funnel those off into different different events and different result sets. So when you put all this together, the Azure services, event hubs, event grids, analytics, really it becomes a discussion over like a whole build type couple of days. Plug. Does that help? Does that make sense?
I can't tell you because I didn't ask the question.
I'm sensing a nod, so I'll take that.
So it sounded good to me. Sounded like a real business case. We don't have any more questions in the chat unless anybody wants to throw one in there super quickly. What I should do is I should let everyone see your face instead of just your links screen. So you are presenting tomorrow. What time are you on tomorrow?
10:30. 10:30. I should know that.
I should know it as well, but I don't.
Yeah.
And your topic is?
The topic is so it's about streaming analytics. So what we do is we've got an enterprise application which has been fairly static. It's one of the ones we've worked with for a long time around records and document management, and we actually take the events that are generated and we push those into streaming analytics, and then we create like a rules-based scenario for decision making, which are event driven. So it's pretty cool.
Nice. Well, if anybody listening to us live wants to find that session, you can go to our website and look for tomorrow's events and save that to your calendar. Or if you are listening on the YouTubes later, the recording will be released not very long after the live session. So no more questions. Thank you so much for your time, Errol. It was lovely to have you.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your hard work. I know how much this gets put in, so really appreciate that.
Great to have you involved. I'll see you next time.
All right, see ya. Bye.
Bye.